Hello, everybody, and welcome back to PoliSync's AI for Social Good webinar series. This is our final stretch. This is webinar number 5 out of 6. So thank you for joining us again. And if you're new, of course, welcome. Today, we've got a super popular topic on the use of AI in humanitarian action. So we're going to be talking about how to harness AI and AI-based tools for efficient, but also localized humanitarian action. And these webinars are a group effort. It's brought to you guys not just by PoliSync alone, but by 6 of our partners. In every session, we have sort of a star partner. Today, it's going to be CALP. But we do have 5 other partners and the generous support of Microsoft Philanthropies. So big shout out to our partners and thank you so much. For our last webinar in the series, there's just like one more chance to join us after today. It's on June 17th. And we're going to be stepping a little bit away from the workspace, sort of, and talking more about human creativity and augmentation. How do we augment rather than replace? How do we enhance what we're able to do and how we're able to be creative rather than, worrying about eliminating some of those things entirely. So please do join us if you can. We also have a fantastic AI resources page. So there are QR codes here if you want to access them. Of course, they're on our website as well. The AI resources page, please do use it. It gets more and more interesting because after each session, we add info from our speakers. Sometimes the audience requests something. So please do check that out. It's completely free, whether you attend webinars or not. So feel free to recommend it and register for webinar number 6 if you're interested in attending. A quick bit of housekeeping before we jump into our topic that you guys are all waiting for. Q&A is not going to be live. Please use the Q&A question mark little thing at the bottom of Zoom to enter your questions. If we're able to, we will be able to respond to questions over the course of the presentations and the panel discussion, but we will still have time at the tail end of the webinar. And if you'd like to stay after, as the majority of our audience has in the past, we will keep talking for 15 minutes afterwards, and we will continue to answer questions. But just remember, no questions equals boring webinar, so please don't be shy. We also have a demographic poll. Guys, please try and fill this out. This is 6 questions, so you do need to scroll down a little bit. And this is more for our statistics to understand the diversity of our audience. And lastly, if you need closed captions, there's, of course, that little CC at the bottom of your screen. And so onwards to our topic today. So AI and humanitarian action. What does this mean when we say that we're harnessing it to be more efficient, to be more localized? AI has the potential to transform all sorts of areas of work and life, as we've seen over the course of this series. But in this case, how can it be used to revolutionize humanitarian response? How is it used in disaster relief, conflict zones, or for other communities in crisis? But more importantly, rather than just the organizations themselves using this to deliver, how do we work in a way that ensures that the local communities we work with that we're increasing their access and understanding of these tools? How do we look at how we're able to solve the localization gap by charging the capacities of local partners like grassroots organizations by automating a lot of otherwise really expensive processes? So we have some awesome speakers with us today that are going to speak to this topic. Of course, I'm back. I'm your moderator, Sandra Uwantege Hart. I'm the Tech for Good strategist at PoliSync. And we're going to take an approach during this webinar that sort of like zooms in. We've got 3 different angles. First, Brent Phillips, who's the podcast producer of the Humanitarian AI Today podcast. If you like this topic, please follow that podcast, by the way. He's going to give us a broad view of what's going on in the sector at large. He interviews all sorts of innovators across the humanitarian sector. Then Rory Crew, who is head of data and digitalization at the CALP network, is going to bring us more of like an organizational inward focus. What does the organization do in order to adopt AI responsibly, and what do we need to consider? And Carol Sanchez, who's head of nonprofit relations at Tech to the Rescue, is going to be talking to you guys about probably the exciting stuff that you came here for, which is how do you get to implementation? What are the main use cases? What does it look like to partner with AI-based tech firms, for example, if you're an organization. So she's going to walk us through that. Then we're going to have a super interesting panel discussion and take your questions. But let's kick off first with Brent. Over to you.
Hey, everyone. Welcome to the podcast. I know. Welcome to the webinar. So I'm Brent Phillips. I produce the Humanitarian AI Today podcast, and Rory was our last guest, and he's on the panel. And I don't think people know, but the podcast has been going on for 6 years now, and Rory was our 91st guest. So it's quite amazing. So I also run humanitarian AI meetup groups in 15 cities, and I manage our volunteer projects. And background-wise, I actually got my start a million years ago, back during the conflict in the former Yugoslavia. And back then, the internet was the AI of the day, and email list servers. And, a lot has changed and a lot hasn't, in that, the internet is still important, and collecting information from the field and getting information, back and forth from people in need on the ground to donors to aid workers trying to plan their operations hasn't changed much at all. So it's kind of interesting. We're just leveraging another sort of medium to try to help. And as I was preparing for this talk earlier today, I heard one of our guests mention that wherever you have data, you can leverage AI. So it's kind of a good point, in that even though a lot's changed, a lot hasn't, and the field is wide open for applications of AI. So I'm going to share my screen here, and here we are. So I produce the Humanitarian AI Today podcast, and as you can see, we have quite a lot of guests on the show. And what I try to do, our secret is instead of me being an expert, I try to find experts to talk on applications of AI and sort of dilemmas that we're facing. And just recently, we did a series of 6 panel discussions that was sponsored by UKHIH and ELRA. And we talked a lot about AI use cases. And I think we realized that it's just really difficult to pinpoint specific projects. Like, there's a lot of pilots going on and there's a lot of experimentation, but it's hard to come up with a real scope of who's doing what in the field and whether it's working or not. So we had 2 different discussions sort of assessing AI use cases. But I'm going to go on to our next slide here. And I'm actually filling in for one of our researchers. She's German, and it's hard to say her name, but it's Marianne Zieholm. And she's a researcher with Northeastern University, and I work closely with her. And I helped her on a paper that's examining humanitarian aid in the age of AI. And she originally sought, like UKHIH, to really get a feel for who's doing what across this broad humanitarian sector. And I think she quickly realized that, as we all do, that it's really hard to find a kind of one-size-fits-all approach to scoping out who's doing what across the AI sector. And she actually pivoted. So this is her paper. She wrote a paper, The Inflection Point, Examining Humanitarian AI in the AI Age. And what she hoped to do was just to look at how AI is being used, what the dangers are, what's working, what isn't. And she had to pivot the project to really think about, she interviewed a bunch of our guests and others to really think about, can we come up with maybe a broader idea on how to approach AI, thinking about AI use cases. And here's a little slide that she had, and it's just like her approach. So she hoped to scope out the landscape, and she ended up sort of deep diving into just a handful of projects and talking to a bunch of people. So here we go. So she mainly focused on 3 projects, and in terms of like buckets, she organized them into buckets, maybe like an admin bucket, like a bucket that's useful for anybody just approaching applying AI, and then a bucket for maybe frontline humanitarian workers, and then a third bucket that's a little bit more technical and detailed, really benefiting aid organizations. So in Miriam's presentation, we're going to just get a feel for our use cases. And she chose Ganet, which is organized by Data Friendly Space, the Signpost Initiative, which is run by the International Rescue Committee, and Microsoft actually has an interesting project looking at assessing damage. So Garnet is just like a chatbot, and it's a really cool chatbot, and it's plugged into a lot of data sources, including Relief Web. And you're able administratively or as a operational planning to really just get a feel for who is doing what across the sector. And it's a lot like ChatGPT in that you could ask complex questions and find answers. So you might want to, in real time, get a feel for who's doing what kind of needs are arising, and it can actually translate the information from different languages into English that can help you. So this is one AI use case. And I bring this up just because it's kind of a general, easy to access use case. And that sort of typifies what a lot of people are doing in the field. They're looking at ways people can interact with information. And the next one here, we're going to talk about, these are Ganat use cases. So if you don't have to read the slides, but this is a use case, somebody in the field, a bridge has collapsed and so many people are displaced. And, how can I get my aid into the field and kind of bypass this hurdle? And then we're going to look, here we are, Signpost AI. So that's the next one. And Signpost, they actually run a sort of a network of volunteers who help to answer queries posed by refugees and migrants and others. And you can use it to ask questions like, where can I find food? Or how can I sign up for aid or satisfy legal requirements and things like that. So this is sort of intermediate application that's widely used by tons and tons of refugees crossing borders every day. And then Microsoft, as I mentioned, they run an AI for Good lab, and they have a new machine learning model that looks at damage assessments. So this is something that a humanitarian organization might use at headquarters to really quickly get a feel for what's happened in the field, a natural disaster, sort of a man-made disaster, bombing, massive bombing in Ukraine or something crazy like that. But, just to get a feel for the damage using satellite imagery and to assess it. So this is sort of our third bucket of use cases. And on the podcast, we just see a lot of people talking about their applications and their pilots, and they usually kind of fit in these sort of categories in terms of like a broad use, a use for people in need on the ground, project participants and others, and something for organizations. So I'm just sort of generalizing what we're seeing out there, but this is pretty much it. I mean, this is what I'm seeing, and there's other projects as well. So, and then Miriam, she wanted to just give a shout out to three other initiatives. One's Disaster Tech Lab, and the White Helmets in Syria has done a tremendous amount of work looking at satellite imagery and communications, leveraging AI and technology to facilitate communications. And then you have Shaktun, AI-powered flood prediction and emergency alert system for climate-affected communities. So this is sort of a narrowly focused AI initiative. So this is what you kind of see across the sector, a lot of pilots and a lot of, projects tailored for different use cases. And then Miriam, she did want to point out that, it's just really hard in this sector to implement AI use cases. And she realized that we really, really, as everybody does, we really need to be careful about our projects. So she came up with, this is our last slide of hers, and she just has some advice about, building trust with communities and trying to get to know needs in the field. And this is something that on Rory's podcast, here's Rory, Rory and Till from Swiss Church Aid, Till brought up, Till and Rory, we talked a lot about it. And, Till really emphasized, identify what's working and what isn't, and really communicate with your staff and stakeholders and try to act as an intermediary, getting to know needs in the field and linking people to technology versus sort of parachuting some pet project. And then deploy from the ground up and study your data and plan your applications. So this is kind of the last of my slides, but as a takeaway, on the Humanitarian AI Today podcast, we really try to get a feel for emerging technology and how things are evolving. And Omdena, like Tech to the Rescue, really focuses on helping NGOs and private sector companies experiment with AI, and they've done a huge amount of work. And, this is a sort of an outlet that we can turn to, like Tech to the Rescue and Omdena, these sort of third parties. And then lastly, I just wanted to make a point that I try to do on the podcast a lot is that the sector is changing really fast and our use cases are fast. And so we have sort of a agentic AI landscape that's emerging now where you take these small AI models and do a ton of different little things and you break down your projects with these agentic models. And then lastly, I promise our last slide here, we have actually ways of actually that AI agents and models can communicate across, across the internet with each other, share data and things like that. So when we think about AI use cases, it's important to think about how technology is changing and these sort of back-end ways that, we're connecting AI applications together. And as an organization, it's great to think about what you might want to do, but you really have to keep up with the pace of, how things are changing. So I think that's my grand takeaway here. And I'll turn it over to Rory.
Fantastic. Yeah, I can just kick us off. After listening to Brent, I think always I just want to throw away everything I've already planned and just sort of respond to some of his points and just sort of have a general discussion as well. I've made so many notes already of just things that you've said that I want to touch on and go on my own research as well. Um, I'm here to talk about the CALP network and how we started exploring, began our sort of AI journey as well. So I've called it Preparing for Impact as well, and it sort of reflects I think the different where we started our expectations, and the perhaps desires, and then some of the realities about deploying AI as a smaller organization as well. So, OpenAI, ChatGPT, which was the sort of viral launch of AI for a lot of us, and like outside of like Google Maps or embedded AI was probably a lot of our first like real hands-on experience was November 2022, which now it sounds like a really, really long time ago. And I was sort of reflecting coming up with this presentation, like what has been the changes that we've seen as well. And honestly, I think they've been less than we would have expected, when we were that we, when it was launched, just over 3 years, or just under 3 years ago now as well. But at the time, what we did as CALP, we realized that people were going to be coming to us to explore AI use cases in humanitarian cash assistance. But we didn't have much AI experience. I'm the CALP's data and digital advisor, and we got a wide range of expertise and specialties within CALP, but no specific AI capacity. So we thought the best way to do that was to upskill our staff and all learn together as to figure out, okay, what can AI do? What are the risks? What are the limitations, the pros and cons? And we thought, practice on ourselves essentially, and then we can start exploring externally as well. Which I think is a fantastic approach as well. When you're looking at something which has potential risks and impacts as well, as Brent showed in his slides, we focused on the admin, the low risk stuff, rather than jumping straight to the beneficiary, the sort of the higher risk, potentially higher impact as well. But let's figure out stuff internally. So we hired a consultancy firm called Torchbox, and we actually heard from Ed Baldry, who supported us on this in the first webinar of this series, I believe it was. We brought everyone in CALP together, with a program staff, ops staff, admin, comms, everyone to figure out, okay, what do we think we can use AI for? We had some training courses about here's what AI is, here's what it isn't, here's Gen AI, machine learning, getting us all up to speed, learning the same languages. And then through a series of workshops, explored probably about 50 different use cases about how we as an organization could explore it before even looking externally as well. So we sort of figured out that okay, AI could play a small role in CALP today and deliver value. Even at that time, I think our aspirations were somewhat modest. We realized that it wasn't going to be revolutionary. I think that we were gonna it's going to move us forward and help us improve, but it wasn't going to radically change the way that we work as well, which is I think largely turned out to be the case. We also knew that we couldn't. It was moving so quickly that we couldn't have a sort of set roadmap of okay, here's going to be our 5-year AI journey. So we sat down and we got everyone in the organization involved to come up with 6 principles for our AI deployments as well. And these aren't necessarily just organizational policies. These are things that okay, if anyone is using AI in the organization, these are the things that they should follow. So it's about prioritizing human oversight and quality control. So not just putting AI generated content out there, adhering to ethical considerations, protecting user data, maintain transparency and credibility, enhance efficiency, love that one, innovation and access to tools, and foster human connection and expertise, which is really what CALP is all about. And these might seem a little bit simple in some respects as well, but what we really embedded with people is that, okay, if you're doing anything related to AI within CALP or related to CALP, just make sure you follow these principles, and people have taken them on board so they can explore independently, sort of act independently, but we know that there are sort of these broad guardrails in place. So we started out, we didn't have a roadmap because we realized it was too sort of strict, and things were changing too fast. So we came up with what was called a futures cone. So sort of listing the use cases between the preposterous, possible, and the projected as well. So the preposterous were things that, okay, never, never going to happen. All time and resources, CALP becoming an AI leader in the sector. That's not what we're about. We've already got a focus, humanitarian cash. Possible, live interpretation and 99% reliability. Obviously, we do lots of webinars. They tend to be in French, English, Spanish, or Arabic. And we spend a lot of resources trying to get live either simultaneous translation or transcription in different languages as well, which is expensive and time consuming. So figuring out if we can improve that. And then simpler things, so using it just for semi-automated tasks such as video production as well. So the things on the bottom end, okay, these are things we can work towards within sort of now 0 years and 2 years as well. And the preposterous were, really aspirational things as well. So that's when, this was probably mid 2023. This was finalized. We were all very excited. We had our plan, which is great. And then a few things happened as well. So we had some staffing changes as well. So we had one of our SMT team who was particularly was our like SMT lead for this. She left. Then there was the huge funding cuts across the sector. Which meant that we really realized our desire was probably above our resources as well. We didn't really have any spare funds to deploy models or licenses, employ new SaaS products and things as well. So we had to really scale back our implementations. But we also realized we had a greater need for efficiency as well. We're all now being asked to do a lot more with less as well. So, deploying AI can be a way we can eke those, even if it's 5% more efficient as well. So we had a great plan, which we're very happy with, and then immediately was thrown out. And so what the use cases we actually used was lots of report summarization as well. We have to all read a lot of reports, particularly the ones that always get World Bank reports. I mean, like 600 pages long, ILO reports 400 pages long. I can't read that. Chuck it into AI and it'll give me, the quick summarization, can dive into the key themes. Transcription, it's great at as well. You can focus on the call and not note taking. The comms team have been exploring it for copy creation. You write a LinkedIn post and it can give you the starter of like the Twitter post as well. And it just does this sort of heavy lifting of or you're creating a slide deck with content creation. It will create you the basic deck. You're still going to have to edit it lots, but by the time you've opened up the deck, renamed it, saved it in the right place, AI can do a lot of that for you. So it does the boring heavy lifting. And basically what we learned as well, we confirmed that AI would not be revolutionary, but evolutionary as well. It's moved us along. It's made us more efficient. Getting staff involved in using it is key as well. I think we all now understand the limitations of AI when we're talking about it externally because we've used the tools ourselves. It requires money, time, and attention to do. Again, things that I highlighted that we don't, or we had reduced of after our plan. Focusing small is fine. I think some of the greatest efficiencies can come from, just improving your operational processes or reducing some of the admin burden of staff so they can actually focus their efforts on their technical skills. We came up with the principles and they were really useful. So they encourage staff to explore and share with each other responsibly. So we've now got Slack channels and Teams channels where when people interact with AI and they liked it, didn't like it, or did something, they share it in the channels so we can all learn what everyone's up to as well. And we don't have to then be sort of nervous about, oh, I used AI for this, or creating shadow or grey IT. I think primarily test it on your organization first before imposing it on recipients as well. If you are going to, using AI to make decisions on targeting, but yet you're still raising, supplies requests using pieces of paper as well, you've screwed it up. You've gone way wrong as well. Sort yourself out internally first as well. And as Brent said in the start, wherever you have data, you can leverage AI. Nonprofits, a lot of them are still so paper-based or manual-based or email-based as well. It can be difficult to employ AI because AI can't look in your drawers and go through all your invoices that are in there. So digitize first, improve yourself, and then maybe use AI, and then maybe once use it on targeting or something. But sort out your own house first. And I think we're going to hear from Carol. And I think this is where smaller national organizations can be. Oh, I really have a leg up as well because they can deploy this stuff way quicker than, a $1 million turnover NGO can deploy this way quicker than, the Danish Refugee Council or, UNICEF or something as well. And then, as we said, prioritize admin efficiencies first because it can be high impact relatively and low risk as well. So we had a whole journey. We wanted to take a deliberate approach to AI within the organization. I think we had a great time doing it. We learned a lot. Resources are definitely constrained, but I think now we're better placed to then, come to external fora and talk about it. And yeah, share. And I'm really looking forward to hearing from the other speakers and the panel discussion as well, where we're going to hopefully agree with each other in most cases, and then hopefully have some agreeable disagreements as well. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Rory. And okay, next we have Carol. So Carol's going to tell us a little bit more. You see, we're like inching more and more towards implementation and sort of actually doing it at scale. Carol, from Tech to the Rescue, over to you.
Thank you, Sandra, and thank you, Rory and Brent. It was really, really insightful to hear you. I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to present you Tech to the Rescue, but I want to start by saying that, Brent, the 3 case studies that you presented, Disaster Tech Lab, Shakudun, and the White Helmets, we actually matched them. And we actually got these projects to be implemented in our community of tech partners. So I'm going to explain to all of you what is Tech to the Rescue and how these cases that Brent presented to us came to be a reality to the AI for Changemakers Accelerator. So what is Tech to the Rescue? We are the fastest growing tech for good ecosystem, and our mission is that we believe that every single company in the world can engage in pro bono projects, at least one per year. Think about the law firms and the law environment. Everyone knows that they have pro bono services. So you know that you even, at least in Colombia, where I'm from, you can go to universities and you can ask for pro bono services from young lawyers, people that are yet to be graduated, but you can go and ask for free services. And we envision that in the tech world, every company in the world should be able to provide at least one of these projects for nonprofit organizations. And what we see is that this mix between social organizations or even social businesses and tech companies can scale the pace in which we are solving humanitarian issues, not only humanitarian issues, but also educational issues, economic opportunities. Think about anything that the world is struggling with. We believe that technology can have even a little part in it. why do we think that giving this technology or helping organizations get this technology can be helpful for them? In here, when I say technology, we're also thinking about AI, and AI has been growing so fast, and we're also accommodating to it, right? So in the future, like later in this presentation, I'm going to talk to you about AI for change makers, but think about technology as a whole, right? It can be from a website to a chatbot to an AI-based platform for prediction. So why do we believe it's important? Because 85% of change makers have stated that technology is a key to the success of their organizations. And also because even though this is a reality, 93% of them lack IT talent. Either they don't have a tech team, they don't know how to outsource it, or they simply don't have the budget to do it. And this is where we come. We understand that there's a limited budget, but also we believe that this budget should be allocated into the core mission of the organization, and that technology, when it is a tool to scale, could be accessible in other ways. So this is our vision, and it's a world where every change makers in here, as I said, it can be nonprofit, NGOs, governmental parties, universities, hospitals, with a proven intervention and high impact potential, has access to tech resources, and that these tech resources can help them scale or reach more beneficiaries. And I have a few stories for you. This Chava app is our foundational story at Tech to the Rescue. This doesn't have to do with AI yet. I will get to it. But this is the first project, I think, that to all of us, when I joined Tech to the Rescue, we were only 5. And it proved to us how technology can actually scale and be good, not only for the organization, but also for the people and the beneficiaries. So this is the woman that you see in the right, I think. It's Anielka Medina, and she is a woman from Nicaragua. Unfortunately, her mother died of cervical cancer. And in that moment, she started a small NGO, and she was going to Nicaragua teaching young girls and women how to spot for the signs of cervical cancer. She was also teaching them and giving them lessons with a bunch of volunteers about sexual and reproductive health. She was doing this in person, so she had to go town by town. This meant that she needed buses, volunteers, money. And at some point, it got too expensive for her to reach all of the population that she wanted to reach. So that's when Tech to the Rescue came. And they requested for an app that they could use to do what they were doing in person, but online. So now you have Chava app that is used by thousands and hundreds of thousands of women in all Central America. And in there they have lessons, and they have classes and programs about sexual and reproductive health, and also information about how to spot cervical cancer. So they went from a small scale in Nicaragua, town by town, and then they are now working in whole Central America. And Cloud Primero was the company that we matched them with. This is just technology overall, but I do have some cases about AI. And I want to start with the white helmets one, that is the one that Brent mentioned. And this is also super important case for us. The white helmets, they were part of our AI for Changemakers Accelerator, the climate cohort. And it sounds interesting that they were in the climate cohort because they are a disaster and humanitarian organization. But how did this happen? We matched them first because they wanted to have a tool, an application that could inform people in Syria about bombings or shellings or attacks in certain cities. So they wanted to have an early system to notify people about this. But at some point, they realized that this wasn't enough because some refugee camps are also being affected by floods, for example. So even though you had the early alarm system for the shellings and the bombings, there was still this missing part that it was floodings, for example. And the climate change is affecting all of us, especially in communities that are vulnerable to other kind of situations. So they decided to implement an additional fragment to this app, and it was an early warning system also for natural disasters. That's when they came to Tech to the Rescue, to the accelerator, and this tool now has all of this included. We also have Shakudun that Brent also mentioned, and we're so grateful for this because we do love, and they are working in something similar, but in Somalia. So you see that is the same issue, floods, but it's affecting differently two regions, the Middle East, Syria, Africa, Somalia, and the approach for it is different. And we also believe in something that is important for this webinar, and is localization. The white helmets know their region. They know what they need in Syria. And Shakudun know what they need in Somalia. It's tempting sometimes to say that technology can be replicated in the same way in one region or the other, or that you can grab open source and implement it in the same way here and there. But if you don't understand the context and the specifications of each country, it can be challenging, and it can lead to harm. So that's also why we're so interested in giving these nonprofits and giving the change makers, as we call them, the opportunity to come up with these solutions by themselves. And that's why we also focus on custom-made solutions. We expect the organization to come to Tech to the Rescue and say, I need this. I've done my research. I know that in this region, we need this kind of alarms. And I know that the technology, people can use it in certain ways. Also because users are different in each country and in each target. And we need to have also that into account. Person in Colombia might be able to engage easier with WhatsApp than with an application, but it changes everywhere. And that's why we want to empower, even though like this word can be problematic, but we want to empower the nonprofits to they by themselves say what they need and what kind of users they want to approach. So at the moment, we have 1,800 companies, 2,000 nonprofits from 65 countries. And in here, I want to give a last example, and it's also from Latin America. It's also including AI, not necessarily humanitarian response, but it includes human rights and vulnerable communities. So we have an organization, they are registered in Panama, but they work all over Latin America. And this was one of our AI, one of the first AI cases that we have in Tech to the Rescue. And this organization is called CRIES. What they wanted to do was scrap the internet, some news outlets that they have already mapped, to understand and summarize violations to human rights to indigenous communities in Latin America. They were doing it manually. They had some researchers that every day will log in and will go to these media outlets and will read the news and will try to summarize violations of human rights to indigenous communities. It was really time consuming. And at the end, it was not analysis, because then they needed to take these summaries and analyze them. This task was super time consuming. So they came to Tech to the Rescue. And they came up with this AI-based tool that now is scrapping all of these news outlets for them, giving them the summaries, saving them hundreds of hours of overall work, and leaving them this time to analyze and to provide concepts on what to do with these violations of human rights. You can go to our website. There's plenty of case studies in there to see. I think I just mentioned some. And if there's any tech company in here interested as well in working pro bono, you can just scan this QR code, and we have at least 100 projects available for you to start working. AI, non-AI, easy, hard, complicated, everything. Sometimes, a lot of times actually, I get NGOs asking me, why do companies do this? Why they do this for free? Like, what are they earning? And it's because sometimes it seems too good to be true. They come to Tech to the Rescue, they present a company, and we give them a project, they present a project, and we give them a company that will do it pro bono, meaning at no cost. Sometimes they're like, oh, this is too good to be true. What is the catch? There's no catch, because this is also good for the companies. We see this as an equal partnership. It's not that NGOs are receiving something for free and they need to have like this top-down approach where they need to accept like any conditions. We see this as equal partnerships, and what the company gets, they get the team upskilled. Some of them are still entering AI, for example, or some of them have new employees, or some employees are in the bench, as we call them, meaning that they are in between projects. So they are like They don't have anything to do within a few months. So they come to Tech to the rescue, and we give them this opportunity to upskill, to develop their business, to open new markets, and also, of course, engaging in brand recognition. So how do we do it, and what can you do to get these resources? Is that first we identify top change makers. We do have a system to evaluate the number that we want to work with. We help them scout and identify the tech needs, and then we just match them. If you want, you can just like log into our website, register, we will verify you, and once you are verified, you can submit your projects. You can submit as many projects as you want. We do have a specific programs. I'm gonna go quick through this, and it's the Crisis Resilience Program. We have a focus on tech for Middle East and in Ukraine. And we had before, this was important, tech for Turkey and Syria. This was when the earthquake happened. And we have also engaged in hackathons. And this accelerator is the one that I was discussing before. Unfortunately, we have applications closed now for all of the cohorts. So I'm not gonna go deep into it because this is an opportunity that will open in the future again, but at the moment it's closed. But basically this was an accelerator where we help organizations to come up with an AI strategy for your organizations and a list of projects based in AI that can help you scale. From this is where we had Disaster Tech Lab, Shakudun, and the white helmets that Brent mentioned to us. These are our sponsors, just in case. And if you want to get in contact with us, you can just go to either this email or ngo@techtotherescue.org. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Carol. Super, super interesting. Rory, I have a question for you. So you were, you talked a lot about within CALP, how AI was being considered. And then at the tail end, you started talking a bit more about, how it can be used or what should be done by organizations. So, and Carol, the way that you were going through your presentation talks a lot about adoption and impact. So Rory, when organizations, humanitarian organizations, are adopting AI over the next 2 to 3 years, what do you think are the biggest impacts that communities that are supported by those organizations will see?
I'm going to answer aspirationally rather than perhaps the realities as well. If you look at what recipients most commonly ask for or request, second to cash assistance, which is the preferred modality and delivery mechanism, which is what the CALP network focuses on. It's information about the programs that they're involved in, whether or not they're cash programs or food security or WASH programs, livelihoods, whatever. So Ground Truth Solutions do amazing work, and they've done over 30 reports now, speaking to recipients in 15 countries, and getting their views on the programs which support them and enable them to survive and live more dignified lives. And the most common feedback, pretty much, again after requesting cash, is information about the program. So they often don't know the full details of the program that's supporting them, what they're going to be receiving, when they're going to be receiving it, which is vital for any if you're doing any sort of household planning, you need to know when you're going to receive either the goods or the cash, when it's going to end, where to go to get more information or to raise a complaint, or to understand why you've been selected or why you perhaps haven't been selected as well. And I think AI can be useful in some respects, and this is having these sort of chatbots that recipients can engage with, whether they be voice or text, and then request to speak to a human as well. I think this and we see so few examples of people really working in this communication space, but it's the most common feedback. I always sort of find it baffling that there isn't more work to do. But I think AI, even going as far as in some cases maybe this might be an AI avatar, that might actually work in some places. Some people might actually want that as well, in different languages as well. I think sort of communication with the recipients is going to be key, and actually giving something back to them. So much of what we do is, extractive. Okay, as humanitarians, we give people, money or support, whatever, but then we spend all our time like taking data from them, PDMs, registration data, and none of that information ever goes back to them or is demonstrated how that improves the program or their lives as well. So I think this communication is going to be, if I'm, again, aspirationally, would I put money on it? I don't know.
Well, I think these apps are already being developed. I've seen a couple of them in the early stages. That being said, there's this really cool platform. The company is called Green Ant, and the platform is called Desidera, and it's a climate analytics platform at its core, but it has an AI assistant. And one of the really interesting use cases for that, and they've started to partner up with different organizations, is for local communities and local leaders themselves to be able to, even if they don't know what data layers, or how they work, they can just ask, how likely is it that my village is going to be flooded in the next 6 months? And they will get an answer that is drawing from all of these layers, of climate data. So it's, that reflexive relationship, which I think historically humanitarian organizations have struggled with, is what you're referring to. And honestly, people are going to start using these types of tools before humanitarian organizations introduce them to them. So I think we also shouldn't make the mistake of thinking that these are somehow tools that are maladapted to communities or what. We really also need to have the conversation with those communities to understand more about which tools we choose, and how they might be adopted. But Carol, like, this is sort of part of something that we actually haven't talked about that much in these webinars, which is that we always focus on, like, what is the impact of the technology? What does the technology do? Sort of like this forward-facing view without realizing that actually, there are some prerequisites. And like Rory talked a lot about this. But in your work, I know you guys, in order for your projects to be successful, are assessing readiness in using AI in nonprofits or, another form of new technology. So what signals do you look for that suggest that an organization is prepared to successfully integrate AI into its operations? So like not just use, integrate into operations sustainably and scalably.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think this is a really important question because we tend to think that just because I want it, I can have it. And sometimes this willingness is not enough. So we do have 7 categories that we pay special attention when we are checking an organization's capacity to adopt the technology. Because we can all have good ideas, but the capacity to adopt it is what's gonna lead to a good result. So the first thing that we do is that they have a good and strong project pitch. Why? Because when we started Tech to the Rescue, we were accepting a lot of organizations and they were coming without ideas. And in the way, they said, oh, I saw this organization got a new website. I can have a new website. That's good enough. Like anyone should have a website. But then it started to get more complicated and projects were being left, like abandoned in the middle of the implementation. So we started to require them to have a project pitch to see if since the beginning they have done their research. And when I say project pitch, it's not only about like, oh, I want this idea. We want to see if they have the research, if they have a good problem statement, if they understand why and for what they need this technology. Then we want to understand if they have proven tech experience or a good attitude to innovation. This thing with tech, like proven experience, is tricky because sometimes we have organizations or change makers that are just starting, or they are gonna start basing their whole infrastructure in technology. They're gonna be like a tech-based NGO, but they are just starting. We still want to support them, but we want them to understand why they are so interested in technology as the center of their operations. And in this case, we see the attitude to innovation. How do you think you are innovating in your field? Not only regarding technology, but in different things. What are you doing different that other organizations in your field are not doing? And why do you believe you using technology is going to help you achieve more than other regular, like what do you think is a regular non-tech based NGO? Then we also see the team structure and the execution capacity. And this is super important. And when I think about NGOs coming up with a project, I also always encourage them to think about the team that they have and if they have the capacity to manage the project. Why? Because this technology, even though is gonna be developed by a tech software agency or outsider, you need at least a project manager. You need someone that is gonna follow through the development of this tool, and you need to know that the tech company is good at developing, is good at programming, but you are good in your topic of interest. If you are working in humanitarian assistance, or if you are working in disaster response, or if you are working in education, whatever, you are the expert in this topic. The tech company, they don't know anything most likely about humanitarian response. They know a lot about coding, but they are not going to come up with human-centered solutions if you don't guide them through it. So the fact that you have a PM and the fact that you have a team that can accompany the tech company within this process is mandatory, and it makes the whole difference, because it will also help us achieve user-centered and human tech tools, not only a simple website that is going to be just usable, but it's not going to put the user and the beneficiary, as we call it sometimes, at the center.
The humanitarian user, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, great.
And then we have just like beneficiaries, like if this tool can help you scale, either in the number of beneficiaries or improve the services that you are providing them.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's super comprehensive. And I think it's also really important, because we're still in the early stages of adoption, but adoption is a process, and all of these ingredients, are sort of part of that secret innovation sauce, that allows you to really scale initiatives. But let's talk localization. Because, we promised to talk about this at the start of the webinar. And honestly, a lot of our attendees, a lot of our questions have come from local organizations. So maybe let's start general. How do you, and this is a question for both of you. Rory, will kick off with you. Carol, you can jump in afterwards. And if Brent rejoins, he can give us his take. But how do you see local organizations potentially having an advantage over international organizations in AI adoption and implementation? Going back to some of the things that you were saying, Carol, one of those facilitating factors is agility. And the smaller the organization, the quicker they can move, right? And this is one of these local actor potential advantages. But Rory, within the context of cash assistance, or even just aspirationally, as you said last time, what do you think? Like, what do you think the advantage is potentially that local orgs have over international humanitarian actors?
I think they've got so many. I mean, trying to deploy any AI tool in an INGO or a UN agency just fills me full of dread, and I hope I never really have to do it. But there's we speak to lots of smaller national organizations, and they can deploy these tools so quickly as well. And I think, as sort of Carol touched on, partly because it's far easier to be more people-centered and user-centered, because if you're in a smaller organization, it's not a HQ, somebody in a HQ, and like an IT person in a HQ somewhere, or a regional office building the solution and having to jump on a Zoom call and find out like business requirements from the team. It's actually the team who are going to be using the tool, building it themselves as well, which it shortcuts so many miscommunications and things. They can build the tool that they need to do it, and they also can do it less, formally. They can spin up their, MVP or their sort of alpha version and just really figure out, okay, does this work for us as well? And they can do it using, as we answered in one of the Q. I mean, I think open source tools, they offer so much promise in this space, but they can be difficult to spin up. They used to be more expensive now to host, but with there's more and more like very inexpensive cloud hosting options. But I was helping somebody spin one up the other day, and I was just using AI to help them like spin it up as well. I mean, I could have never done this 2 years ago, but I was literally had ChatGPT and Gemini open, was like, walk me through it. And every time I got an error, I was like, what's this error? So I think, you can just do it so much quicker as well. And there's obviously risks come with that. You need to manage the risks. And I think what we always sort of try and say is you don't necessarily need to understand, like you're saying, with the data layers and the flood forecasting, you don't need to understand, exactly how the technology works. I have no idea how Google Maps actually works. I mean, it's hugely complicated behind the scenes, but I sort of understand some of the risks with using it as well. I understand I shouldn't just blindly follow it because it might send me down a one-way road, and that's on the wrong way down a one-way road, and that's still my responsibility. So I think all this super exciting. They can deploy these way, way quicker than anyone else. But as anyone, you need to be aware of the risks that this presents to you as your organization, or perhaps the recipients if you're doing some more recipient focused as well. I mean, just in the case of grant management as well, or like applying for grants. I mean, there's so many national organizations, and Sandra, you and I were chatting about this. If you receive a grant from a national organization, more than likely AI has been used fairly heavily to produce that application as well. Whereas, I was supporting an INGO with a grant the other day, and they didn't use AI for it at all. It just hadn't even really occurred to them. Obviously, there's pros and cons of doing that, but I think they're in a very different space. And I think this is the one time when using AI, the national organizations can actually move a lot quicker, demonstrate greater accountability, and really, just make kind of embarrass INGOs, be like, all right, you can do this in 3 years. We can do this in 6 weeks for a quarter of the cost, whatever the program is.
Yeah. Yeah. I just saw a promo video from a startup in Haiti that was created using AI because everybody's gone, like nobody can produce videos, and this is just a bootstrapped local startup, so it's amazing. And I think a key takeaway for local organizations, especially in our audience, we also got some appreciation for the question itself, is that there are tools that can help you actually develop AI tools, which Carol, we talked about a little bit previously. But on this point around local organizations' advantage, what's your take? Maybe keep it super short, because then we'll, announce sort of the official end and then go into our overtime where we'll take a few more questions.
Perfect. I will say it comes down to the fact that in these big international NGOs, everything is invented. They have processes for everything already. You have processes for hiring, for allocating, but for everything. There's no space to create something new because this change can be really challenging. It takes a lot of bureaucracy. While in smaller NGOs, as is like so centered and so also individually dependent, you have a lot of space for creating, thinking, and innovating. And it's good when you don't have everything so strict and set up. You just can create. And I think that's what is happening now.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot in there about digital inclusion, but just, so that we are respecting our time for everybody who actually has to leave at the top of the hour. This is sort of the official closing of the webinar, but I just wanted to remind everybody we still have one more webinar number 6. Please do. It's actually going to be an extension of a lot of these capacities, for agility and innovation that we're talking about. So you can scan the QR code there to register. And of course, we have our free AI resources page, which some of the stuff presented by Brent, for example, is going to be uploaded there. So please do scan and visit and use the resources page. It is, of course, there for you. But we're going to continue the conversation for another 10-15 minutes. For anybody who wants to stay, you are totally welcome, and also welcome to continue asking questions. This is actually more building on the conversation, right? And kind of combining a few questions that we've gotten from the crowd, from registrants. But this is about digital inclusion, right? And the work that, there is, just in the same way as there's sort of like preparatory work before organizations adopt new technologies, no matter who they are, there's also a question around digital access and inclusion that sort of is a bigger question, surrounding the introduction of these types of technologies at the field level, at the program level, whether it's by local or international actors. And I think what's really interesting is we're now seeing sort of an explosion in emerging economies, the global south, the global majority, whatever you'd like to call it, of tech startups that are developing their own applications for that culture, for that context, and that are actually existing sometimes in proximity to humanitarian programs, but organizations don't know it. And of course, all of those tools are being developed. We're seeing sort of this explosion because all you need is a single device. You can literally develop entire software packages just using a smartphone, or build an AI tool just using a smartphone, and that's where digital access and inclusion comes in. So, I mean, to you two, I'm curious to know what you guys think. What role or what additional role should humanitarian organizations start playing in making AI technology more accessible to the communities that they're working with? Like, do we have to engage more in digital inclusion and digital access work in order to make it possible to have the communities we work with access these technologies? And if so, who does that work? I don't have the answer, but I'm curious to know. Maybe Rory, let's just start with you. I know we've talked about this a little bit in the past.
I think this might be mildly controversial, is I think what can the humanitarian sector do is just get out of the way.
Yeah.
If we're saying that, the large organizations are slow to deploy their own tools, whether they be internal or external as well. And we're moving, with Tom Fletcher, the sort of chief humanitarian essentially at OCHA and the UN. He's talking about a humanitarian reset. At CALP, we're talking about Cash 2.0 is doing cash differently. And I think what this really looks like is, or one of the elements of this is, aside from localization, is decentralization as well. So a new tool doesn't have to be a Save the Children or even a CALP or a UNICEF tool or something, because that has huge sustainability problems as well. As soon as the funding for that project goes, if it's a chatbot or something, then it disappears. But if there is an organization in Chad, who for probably perhaps using Llama for free, and for some licenses, if they've built this sort of chatbot which is scraping publicly available like humanitarian data, that should be given light and perhaps platformed and supported, and then instead of UNICEF like even investing or taking over, maybe they just put more data on HDX or something that then that can feed from as well. So obviously it's risk, because what we like to do, I mean, Carol is so on the nail with this. I mean, large organizations, we have processes because as you grow, you need to standardize to control risks, or that's at least the perception as well. Whether or not all this works, like every procurement rules, is there any evidence that procurement rules actually save money and actually decrease
Or save lives, more
save
importantly.
lives, or decrease corruption? Like there's so little evidence out there, but we spend like millions of dollars around procurement rules and things as well. So I think just getting out of the way and not even like support, because by supporting stuff you can still smother it, but just
Yeah. Get in the back seat,
yeah.
basically. Yeah. Carol, what are your thoughts? Especially, and like, how does this play out in the partnerships at Tech
Yeah.
to the Rescue? I'm really curious.
So I think I also have like a controversial take, because I believe that because it's the hot topic, everyone is rushing to use AI, right? And it's like sometimes organizations, and we see it as it's gonna solve a lot of issues, right? And that we can put like a pinch of AI in here and it's gonna solve 10 problems. And I will be really careful with it. And also and the second part that you said about like including the users, I think this is super important, but I also think it needs to be context-based, right? And we need to understand if these users actually want to use AI. Because in my personal day-to-day life, let's say I go and I want to go talk to customer service of airline. I have to catch a plane today. So, and I don't have that I don't have the space to talk to a human. I only talking to a chatbot. And it's so frustrating. So imagine in a humanitarian setting, if I get frustrated by this like small issue, if someone is asking for cash assistance and the organization decided, yes, AI can help us do this more efficiently, it's true, but by like imposing so much AI in them, they're gonna get frustrated. So maybe our purpose of making their life easier or like diminishing their conditions of like vulnerability is gonna get worse. So I will be really mindful of where AI has a space, how and why, right? And it's not about like putting the user in it, like just to use it and that's it, and you have to go and use AI and it is gonna solve your problems, but how and why? So I don't know if actually, and this is a question I have myself with all of this movement in AI, if we should be using AI mostly for our internal scaling, for like making our work easier, and maybe not pushing it so much in the final beneficiary.
Fair point. Fair point.
I just want to come on that point. I mean, I
Yeah, go ahead,
Um,
Rory.
obviously CALP, CALP focus on humanitarian cash and voucher assistance. And so I'm constantly asking, what role can AI play in like better, improving humanitarian CVA? And I'm like, honestly, I don't see much externally that is going to be, revolutionary. Partly because people's processes are still so manual as well. You have data sent to the financial service providers from the registration tool, attached to an email, an Excel sheet or a Google Sheets or something attached to an email as well. You need to have your systems need to be sort of robust and complex enough and semi-automated enough anyway, I think, to leverage AI externally, and we're just not there as well. So there's elements externally of okay, fraud and error checking could be kind of interesting, like flagging, things as, potentially fraudulent transactions. But again, like that money's already gone out as well. Like, what can you do about it? And there's lots of other controls that are probably just as effective as well. Like chatbots, again, like super useful. It's not, direct to humanitarian CVA, but then, it takes minimum probably 6 months to sign a contract with a financial service provider. Like that's where you should be using AI. Like the recipient shouldn't. It doesn't need to touch the recipient. If you're saving 1% fraud using AI, but you've taken 6 months to sign that contract, like you're focusing on the wrong places.
Exactly. Oh, oh, geez. We've got a bit of a US focused question in the chat. I think, yeah, Rory, from the cash perspective, you should probably know about the SNAP program in the US. So this is like the SNAP, it's like a card. It's basically like a welfare card, that you can use to pay for, it replaced food stamps, basically, and now uses debit cards. So we've just got a question from an attendee on the impact of Trump's big, beautiful bill on those types of programs. I'm going to generalize this. I'm sorry, attendee, just because we have a very international audience. But maybe let's address the elephant in the room around what is going on in the US and what influence is that going to have at the field level on programs and communities and this process of adoption of these emerging technologies, AI in particular, obviously. Because we kind of can't ignore the fact that there's going to be trickle-down impact. Is it going to be positive or negative? Carol, maybe let's start with you.
Well, I think that we've seen the first consequences, and it's about the USAID, right? We have like thousands of layoff employees, but also the programs. Like personally in Colombia, I've seen a lot of programs being stopped by these cuts, not only by organizations that were directly funded by USAID, but also by third parties, organizations that were dependent on the main one. And I think that in terms of technology, of course, like if you have a budget cut, you will first cut what doesn't seem necessarily. Like if you are providing, for example, food in small towns in Colombia, you need to buy the food. You don't need to have a update the website. So it's going to be the first thing that you're going to cut off is technology. And at the end of the day, it can also affect like the way you fundraise, for example. If you don't have a good brand recognition, if you don't have good social media, website, whatever, if you don't have a good communications team, it can affect the way you fund and you get donations. It can affect the way also your employees are motivated because of this uncertainty. So I believe that the political climate that we are in right now, it's affecting way beyond what we think, because the first layer that we see is, yes, employees being dismissed or offices being closed, but under it you have a lot of risk for the humanitarian sector. You have other donors, for example, that will say it's not safe to invest in these organizations anymore. You have employees that will rather move to another field of work because it's just they don't know if they will continue working here. Yes. And then beneficiaries also can start losing the trust in the organization, right? Like, how can I give information to this NGO if they're not going to have money? And what's going to happen with this data? For example, Rory, you were mentioning it before, that they are collecting. What is the purpose now if they don't have funding?
Yeah, no, those are all super good points. And I think the point around this risk, so historically, we talked about this a bit earlier, humanitarian actors have not prioritized the adoption of technology, period. You know, it's been a big issue, pilot, never scale, you know, whatever is happening. It has been a major criticism. And Carol, I think you're speaking exactly to why that could be an Achilles heel, you know, because if you just stop prioritizing those things, you're going to stop prioritizing the things that are least important to you. I actually had never thought about it that way anymore. But then on the flip side, you know, of that risk, again, I feel like we're at this tipping point, you know, where there is potentially an opening of space for local actors, local tech, and local humanitarian organizations to start stepping in and filling that space because they have the community capital, the trust capital, and the social capital to maintain, you know, that sort of engagement with communities. And I feel like international organizations are several degrees removed, which exposes them more to global politics, but also increases the chances that communities and partners are just not going to trust them anymore because of this reliance, you know, on an international aid faucet that is just being turned off slowly as time goes on, unfortunately. But Rory, what do you think about that? Of this, is this an opening? Is this like a massive risk? Is this like a disruption that is eventually going to bring us to a good place, aspirationally?
Yeah, let's go aspirationally. And I think we, you know, in some respects, the US cuts and things, lots of European donors, five, six donors still provide like the majority of international humanitarian assistance as well. And lots of those donors had announced cuts either formally or informally well before the US. So, we're focusing on the US because it was like the biggest individual thing, but everyone else was doing this before. And I unfortunately think that, when the US does incredibly dumb stuff, it validates other countries doing incredibly dumb stuff as well. I always sort of find it strange as sort of humanitarians. We always say it's our job to like essentially do ourselves out of a job as well. But there's no country on earth that doesn't have some type of like humanitarian assistance domestically as well. It might be called something different. I mean, it's awful, in the UK where I'm from, there's huge food, there's huge amounts of, food bank usage as well. So, no matter how rich a country, wealthy country is, there is still always going to be a need, and now an increasing need, for civil society organizations. And whether you call it humanitarian assistance, charity, social protection, whatever, it's people who aren't the government providing support to like citizens as well. I grew up in Wales. If you remove Wales from the UK, it'd be one of the poorest countries in the EU. So we're always going to exist, with the Trump and the SNAP bill as well. That's, obviously going to decrease funding, increase administrative resources on the states as well. probably going to see an increase in civil society organizations. I mean, where is this money coming from? Same in the humanitarian space. Every organization, we're looking more now towards foundations, philanthropists, private sectors, like diaspora groups, anyone to provide that, funding. 'Cause even in the US and the UK, to a certain extent, CSOs, civil society organizations received a lot of a lot of government funding as well.
Oh, yeah.
But now, if you're having more civil society organizations and also a diverse range of funding, you actually become a lot more resilient and decentralized and less politicized as well. Like if the government's not
Yeah.
providing it, they're not funding it, so it removes, it from the political space as well. That's my aspirational. Gotta hope I'm right.
No, that's great. And I mean, I think the most interesting thing of all when it comes to AI and this topic is that it's not sector specific. It's not organization specific. Technology is more and more decentralized and more accessible in the same ways that you were talking about. But we've got to wrap up. We have almost 50 people who've joined us, for this overtime session. So thank you so much to the audience for sticking around. Thanks, Rory. Thanks, Carol. Thanks, in absentia to Brent. He wasn't able to come back and join us, but he had a really interesting presentation. So thank you to everybody. Let's close out. Thanks for joining us today.